Hello, welcome to my channel, Imadaf, where I share helpful tips on English grammar and punctuation. This video is a continuation of our focus on the uses of the comma. However, I shall take the opportunity of this video to respond to a question that students have often asked. Just January 2024, a student asked if it was correct, if it was appropriate to begin a sentence with because. I'm going to respond to this issue from the perspective of grammar. Let me state categorically that it is correct, it is appropriate. In fact, it is desirable to begin a sentence with because. Now, I'm focused on because that's the target. I'm actually saying it is appropriate, it is acceptable, it is desirable to begin a sentence with the subordinate clause. There is a need for variety. So, although we are looking at punctuation marks, let's try to respond to this issue by focusing a bit on clauses. Now, clauses are divided into two main parts. We have the main clause and we have the subordinate clause. The main clause is also called the principal clause or the independent clause. And the subordinate clause is also called the dependent clause. The subordinate clauses are further divided into adjectival clause, adverbial clause, and noun clause. This video is not focused on all of these, but it is sufficient for our purpose now to just know that we have two broad categorization clauses, the main clause and the subordinate clause. The main clause, if isolated from the rest of the sentence, can stand alone as a simple sentence. The subordinate clause cannot stand alone. It depends on the main clause for its meaning. Let's look at these examples to illustrate. She does not go to school whenever it rains. This complex sentence has a main clause. The main clause is she does not go to school. If we isolate it, if we remove it, it can stand alone and it will make sense. It will make what we call a complete thought. Whenever it rains. Whenever it rains cannot stand on its own as a simple sentence. Imagine just walking into your classroom and saying, "Good morning, students." And then I say, "Whenever it rains." You're going to look at me and crease your face. Say, "What? So?" Because it does not make a complete thought. So this, she does not go to school, is the main clause. Whenever it rains is the subordinate clause. They ate the food before I arrived. The main clause here is they ate the food. And the subordinate clause is before I arrived. They ate the food before I arrived. So the main clause is they ate the food. And the subordinate clause is before I arrived. In the third sentence, the main clause is he came to school because he wanted to learn. The main clause here is he came to school. And the subordinate clause is because he wanted to learn. Now, if you look at these sentences, you will discover that the subordinate clauses are introduced by what we call subordinate conjunctions. And as a matter of fact, this is what makes the words that follow, the group of words that follow, subordinate, dependent on the main clause for meaning. Whenever, before, because, these words as subordinate conjunctions, and they introduce the subordinate clauses. Of course, these are not the only words that function as subordinate conjunctions. There are many more. For example, after, although, until, unless, because, before, when, whenever, that. These words also function as subordinate conjunctions. Now, when you write, all your sentences cannot follow the same pattern. If you look at readers' books for children that are very young, they always follow the same pattern. This is Simbi. Simbi is a girl. This is Mr. Salami. Mr. Salami is a man. Go on, Ox. Are we to go on? We are to go on. The sentences are mostly simple sentences, and they follow the same pattern, the same grammatical pattern. The subject first, followed by the verb. This is called grammatical pattern or the normal pattern. It is good sometimes to vary your sentence length, sentence type, sentence pattern, and all of that. So you can't afford to always construct sentences that have the main clause coming before the subordinate clause. So it is appropriate, in fact, desirable, recommended that you vary your sentence patterns. So if we want to vary this, we can bring the subordinate clauses first and then make the main clauses to follow. Whenever it rains, she does not go to school. In this sentence, we have inverted the order. We have brought the subordinate clause first whenever it rains, and the main clause follows. This is perfect. This is acceptable. However, when you do this, you must separate the subordinate clause from the main clause with a comma. So, whenever it rains, comma, she does not go to school. It came to school because he wanted to learn. Now, we want to begin this sentence with the subordinate clause. Because he wanted to learn, comma, he came to school. So here we see that this sentence begins with because he wanted to learn, comma, he came to school. It is perfect, desirable, acceptable to begin a sentence with because, provided you meet this condition. And what is this condition? That the clause, the subordinate clause that because introduces must be separated from the main clause. So if you do not do this and you just say because you wanted to learn and you stop here because you wanted to learn, this is not a sentence. This is not acceptable. This is grammatically incorrect. However, if you do not leave it here and you supply the main clause, then it's okay. They ate the food before I arrived. Now you can begin the sentence with the subordinate clause. Before I arrived, comma, they ate the food. Before I arrived, they ate the food. So here you see that the subordinate clause here, introduced by subordinate conjunction, comes first. So, students, it is appropriate, it is grammatically correct to begin a sentence with because, not just only because. In fact, I wonder why we are so fixated on because. It is not the only subordinate conjunction. When you ask or when you query, is it correct to begin a sentence with because, you are actually asking, is it correct to begin a sentence with after, although, until, on, and the rest of that? So any of these subordinate conjunctions can begin a sentence, provided when you finish the subordinate clause, you must separate it with a comma. I say, and I insist, it is desirable. It gives some kind of flavor to your writing. Those of you who are familiar with the story of Gandoki, you'll still recall, Gandoki was a great war chief who lived in northern Nigeria. He loved fighting. Wherever there was trouble, Gandoki was there. Wherever there was a victory feast, he was there. He often gathered a group of boys and told them stories of the battles he had fought. Now, if you look at these sentences, Gandoki was a great war chief who lived in northern Nigeria. He loved fighting. This is the normal pattern. Now, the next sentence, wherever there was trouble, Gandoki was there. Wherever there was trouble, Gandoki was there. Wherever there was a victory feast, he was there. So you see this flavor that is brought into sentence constructions. Imagine that we just have those groups of words like this. Gandoki was a great war chief who lived in northern Nigeria. He loved fighting. Then instead of saying wherever there was trouble, Gandoki was there, we continue and say Gandoki was there wherever there was trouble. And instead of saying Gandoki was there wherever there was a victory feast, we say Gandoki was there wherever there was victory feast. It doesn't sound interesting. So let's go back to punctuation marks. So how do we describe this function of the comma? We say the comma is used. How do we describe this function of the comma? We say the comma is used to separate an adverbial dependent clause that precedes the main clause. The comma is used to do what? To separate an adverbial dependent or subordinate clause. An adverbial dependent or subordinate clause that precedes, that comes before the main clause. I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank you for your time. I want to urge you to share this video. I believe it's going to be helpful to some students out there. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, please do. I also urge you to press the notification bell so that whenever I upload new videos, you'll get an alert. Thank you and thank you.